I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of Movie Star Magic. And this week we're going to be looking at the career of arguably the biggest movie star of all time, Julia Roberts. I would argue at her peak, she commanded the most sort of power and attention in Hollywood and was sort of the representation of that 90s system in which movie stars still reigned, unlike today. Then we can sort of see why we sort of like Julia Roberts in the 90s and how her career has sort of evolved. We've done this a couple times, guys like Val Kilmer, even Meryl Streep to a certain extent, and I'm very fascinated with this sort of 90s period in which movie stars were the sort of dominant way you would get a movie greenlit, and then we see how that sort of industry has shifted throughout the 2000s and 2010s. And sort of where these movie stars end up and where the next movie star is. And that's what this series is ultimately all about. But if you're new to the series, welcome. Essentially how the show is structured is I break down Julia Roberts' career in 3 different chapters. I talk about a defining role in each of those chapters, why I like it, why I think it's representative of that chapter of her career. And then by sort of understanding the career arc of an actor, we can see the different types of abilities and different types of roles that they're able to do, while also sort of chronicling and celebrating their movies. Well, also, I think in the second half of the video, we move away from the career arc and we just talk about that defining feature. I break down what makes, in this case, Julia Roberts' career, what makes Julia Roberts such a compelling movie star. What is her defining feature that she has that she's able to leverage and utilize to make her Julia Roberts, and different than other movie stars and ultimately this huge star. Because I really do think in the sort of 90s period, while she hasn't had necessarily the sort of length of a movie star career of someone like a Tom Cruise or even a Denzel Washington, I do think when she was at her peak, she was the easiest box office sort of guarantee for a studio. People really love Julia Roberts, and they still do, but in this video I want to sort of chronicle her career. And in doing that, we have to start off with chapter 1, the beginning of Julia's career. I'm going to call this chapter the Julia Roberts type. Because very early on, when she sort of came onto the scene and eventually had Pretty Woman, she helped develop a Julia Roberts type, a type that Hollywood is still looking for. There's sort of the great saying where, every actor's career goes from who's Julia Roberts to we need Julia Roberts to we need a Julia Roberts type to we need young Julia Roberts to who is Julia Roberts. And few actors, of course, have that true trajectory, but it's something interesting that I heard the other day, and it sort of is an easy sort of through line to talk about somebody's career, but I think that's even more relevant when we talk about someone like Julia Roberts, because even when we're talking about Florence Pugh, or recently I saw Julia Garner should be the actress in the next Madonna biopic. You're always looking for that sort of young female talent that is sort of new and interesting and can sort of become the next Julia Roberts type. We've had it with the Katherine Heigls of the world, the Anne Hathaways. Of course, the movie industry and business is always changing, but I do want to just mention it because in this first chapter, she had this sort of interesting supporting roles in Steel Magnolias and Mystic Pizza, and she was funny and charming, but it really wasn't until Touchstone and Disney in the 1990 established Pretty Woman really sort of defined the archetype of a romantic comedy. Julia Roberts is very much the queen of romantic comedies, in my opinion, and really helped redefine it. You have 89 when Harry Met Sally, but I think 90 with Pretty Woman, it really defines those archetypes that we've seen, lasting until today. So when people talk about we need a Julia Roberts type, it's just because she's someone who has not only sort of started the genre, but ultimately perfected it later on into the 90s. But in this first period, she creates this Julia Roberts type, this rom-com type lead. Someone who is very likable, who's brutally honest, who is quirky and has some sort of unique elements to her that make her feel relatable, make her feel human, but she's not too weird. She has some of the idiosyncrasies that the girls like, but then she's still not sort of crazy and weird that the guys turn away from her. It's the classic girls want to be her friend, guys want to be with her. And I think Julia Roberts really defined that archetype, which is why I call this first chapter the Julia Roberts type, because there really is no one like her, and Hollywood wants to try to find someone even similar to her because they know that's such a sort of winning archetype in terms of making a movie and in terms of making a compelling lead character. And we see that not only is this chapter ending with Pretty Woman, but I think, in the next few years when we have Sleeping with the Enemy and The Pelican Brief, in which some of these movies I don't think are very good, but regardless, because they have Julia Roberts in them, they make money, and they're smash hits. Sleeping with the Enemy made a lot of money. A Pelican Brief made a lot of money, and because it was this sort of infatuation that the audiences had with Julia Roberts in this sort of period, because of sort of that type that she created of these characters that are very likable, that are very warm, that don't have a lot of flaws to them, but are sort of a little bit odd, a little bit not sort of perfect and traditional, a little bit more relatable, a little bit more human. So when we're talking about a defining role in this period, I have to go with Pretty Woman. It's the movie that started it all, and it's the movie that I think she is just terrific in. Back in 2018, I actually did a whole video on Pretty Woman in my series Old on Old, where I watched the movie for the first time. But then interesting to sort of rewatch that video and then rewatch the movie to see how my opinions change. But my opinion for the most part is the same, and that's being, yes, this is a two-hander between Richard Gere and Julia Roberts, but ultimately this is a Julia Roberts movie. The movie is so well structured, particularly for Julia Roberts as an actor to succeed in this movie, because it allows us sort of get to know her not as this sort of perfect person, even though she is, looks phenomenal in the movie. She is someone that, is a little bit, on the streets literally as a prostitute, who's a little bit more blue collar, who, is honest and has her rules and has a heart of gold, but really has her strict moral code, so that later on in the movie, it's very much not a man saving a woman kind of a trope. We see this woman as someone who's her own person, who has her own beliefs, so that when she does fall in love, it doesn't feel forced, it doesn't feel like a contrivance of the plot and the existence of the movie. What feels like a genuine romantic connection between the two characters, because we early on built the sort of relatable, the sort of human element of Julia's character, in this case Vivian Ward. So just the amount of sort of pathos and relatability and humor I think that she's able to bring through her comedy chops, through her sort of romantic chemistry that she has with Gere. But it really starts off with that sort of early part of the period. Julia's so great at making her character Vivian feel so realistic, feel sort of honest and true. And then when she enters sort of this rich world, she can give this sort of this audience perspective that we weren't necessarily have with, say, Richard Gere's character. And then, like I said, because we give so much attention to her character early on in the movie, when she does eventually fall for the guy, it doesn't feel hokey or sentimental. It feels genuine and pure and authentic, which is so hard to capture in a sort of cheesy kind of romantic movie. So much of that sort of genuine believability and belief in love that you have at the end of the movie is because of Roberts and her performance and her ability to ground that character in some semblance of reality. Then jumping into the second chapter here, I'm going to call this one the Unkillable movie star, because let's not forget, even though Julia Roberts was the queen of the 90s, she had Pretty Woman, she had Sleeping with the Enemy, but in terms of her quality of movies, they kind of dipped, I think, after sort of 90, 91. You have Sleeping with the Enemy, I don't think is great, Pelican Brief, then she has a string of sort of less successful movies, I Love Trouble, Mary Riley, and then, of course, just her spotty personal life, where she was dating every co-star she was ever with. She left Kiefer Sutherland at the altar to elope with his best friend in Ireland. And, but despite that, despite everything she tried to do to sort of taint her public perception, after becoming America's sweetheart, she sort of rebounded in an incredible way and showed that she was this unkillable movie star in 97, where she has, from 97 to 2003, 2004, I think just an incredible, incredible run of hit after hit, of great movie after great movie, of classic. 97, she goes back to the rom-com genre, does My Best Friend's Wedding, and does the classic movie star role of playing someone who is incredibly unlikable, but you end up liking her because of the amount of charisma that Julia brings to the role. That movie is a big success, critically acclaimed, and does well at the box office. Then in 98 has Stepmom, which is another well-appreciated movie, not a huge success, but a success, sort of a double instead of a home run. And then 99 has a true home run in Notting Hill and Runaway Bride, two classics in the romantic comedy genre. The latter totally acknowledging with her sort of public persona of being the person who sort of ran away at the altar, and adopting that and sort of using it as her own superpower in many ways. Then the next year you have 2000, Erin Brockovich, she wins the Oscar. 2001, Ocean's 11, and then even in 2002, 2003, when we have Ocean's 12 and Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, I think she starts to sort of morph her persona away a little bit more from America's sweetheart into sort of the more sexier, mature version of her. But really in this sort of 97 to 2004 range, we see hit after hit of Julia being great in the movies, and also while the movies making a lot of money and being classics within their genre. And we see the sort of charming, sweet, lovable Julia Roberts in a Notting Hill or a Runaway Bride, but then we also see sort of the justice, intense, passionate Julia Roberts in something like Erin Brockovich, sort of those two lanes that she's been able to occupy, and she does so both terrifically in this period. She's demanding $20 million just, for every movie that she does, a salary which is, one of the highest salaries even still today. And like I mentioned at the top of the video, she really was sort of the peak of movie star, and very few actors could command that salary, and it was her face on the poster that sold things. And it was really hard to pick a defining role for this period, but for me, I just had to go with probably my personal favorite Julia Roberts movie, Notting Hill. This is just a total classic romantic comedy for me, and I think it really reinvigorated Julia as someone who really defined the archetype with Meg Ryan in the late 80s, early 90s there. And then I think perfected it, truthfully, in Notting Hill. She works beautifully here with Richard Curtis's dialogue, which always feels sort of awkward and clumsy, but spontaneous and true to life, despite it being, of course, so lyrical and poetic and wonderfully written. You have her playing opposite the sort of bumbling Hugh Grant, her being a little bit more put together and majestic is maybe the word I would say. Idyllic is another one. The movie definitely feels like that, whether it be the sort of beautiful settings in Notting Hill or just her sort of movie star. She plays a movie star in the movie, her movie star kind of persona, and her, of course, sort of commenting on that as well, being, essentially a Julia Roberts type in this movie. I think she gives Curtis a real boost in the writing and its real marriage between the two, just because I think she's able to really succeed in the humor that he's able to bring, but also make the sort of sentimental, truly sort of sappy moments of the movie feel genuine, feel authentic, and feel realistic. Because when we're seeing these sort of sappy moments, oftentimes it's easy to roll our eyes to it, but when you really do genuinely believe it and are invested in the characters and invested in the romance, it's one of the best feelings of all time. It's one of the sort of most dramatically interesting movie choices that you can make. And I think Julia is someone that is one of the very few rare people that can truly deliver that can be funny. She has terrific comedic timing in this movie, just the back and forth between her and Hugh Grant. But then also later on in the movie, when we have these sort of professions of love, there's a believability in it because of that sort of charmingness, of that relatability that she was able to bring to the movie, but also because of her ability to be present, to be sort of use her sort of large features in a way that makes us connect with the material. So it's that humor, that blend of humor and relatability that she's so great at, while also sort of bringing sort of a cool composure to offset Hugh Grant's a little bit more bumbling, sort of stumbling performance in the movie. I think she works perfectly here. It's just a perfect melding, and she really is a terrific romantic comedy lead because she can be very funny, but she can also be very romantic and genuine, and that's what I always think of when I think of Julia, particularly in this movie. It's like, wow, despite her being like this literal movie star, she does feel genuine. She does feel like a real person. She does feel like someone you know. Then in the third chapter, I'm going to call this the adult drama Throwback. It's interesting to see Julia as her career evolves, as we move less and less away from the star system, as movies, that have her name aren't guaranteed successes. She starts to still sort of, I think, age with her audience, where romantic comedies, I think, clearly, appeal to her and her sensibilities when she was younger. Then she gets older and she becomes a mother. She starts to make sort of these more serious adult movies. She starts making movies with her friends in these ensemble period and casts like Charlie Wilson's War, and like I mentioned, Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, or even the Ocean's movies. And then even into the 2000s, she's really making sort of mainstream Hollywood movies that probably would have been successful and she would have made in the 90s, but making them in the 2010s. So we get a Larry Crown or a Money Monster, which don't both sort of feel like, or even Eat, Pray, Love, throwbacks to an earlier era, which is interesting to see her now really sort of leaning into prestige TV with the recent show Gaslit and Homecoming, where she's still making these sort of adult dramas that she's been interested in since the mid-2000s. But now, of course, those movies are sort of on TV now. so she started to morph into that. But it is a fascinating thing to see. Top Gun is doing so well here, and Tom Cruise is sort of seen as the last movie star holding out hope. But while, a lot of his counterparts, Tom Hanks, Julia Roberts, are doing streaming movies, or in the case of Julia Roberts, streaming shows, which is, something back in the day in the 90s. If you did a television show, that's a completely different thing than being a movie star. They were completely different worlds. But if I'm sort of defining a movie within this period, I think it has to go with Eat, Pray, Love. This was Julia's last true, nice, big hit in terms of her career, of her being on the movie star. Of course, it's based on a best-selling memoir, but I think it's still a testament and a reminder to everyone that Julia Roberts is still a movie star and she can still hold a movie, particularly in the early sections of the movie in which she's acting opposite, not a lot of named name people. There's sort of a little bit more no-name actors that haven't sort of popped off in the years since, and it's indicative of her ability to lead a movie and interact with people and still feel like everyone's sort of dream person, where I think a lot of people, particularly, this movie targeting a little bit more middle-aged women, but successful among that group because everyone has that sort of fantasy of dropping everything you're doing and going to find yourself in Europe and eating these great foods and finding religion and love. And this really is sort of a transformative, clearly a part of the character Liz Gilbert's life, based on a true story. Here played by Julia Roberts, and I think she sort of is interesting in this movie because she divorces herself from the traditional path where it's almost like a rom-com character where she fell in love and became happy ever after, and then she gets a divorce, and then she, in this movie, isn't really sort of situated on finding a man. She has to find herself. She has to discover herself first before she's able to sort of fall in love, and that's an interesting thing that we haven't really seen in her earlier career. So while the movie I don't think totally works, I like the first half rather than the second half, it is sort of a testament just to show that Julia Roberts still can open up a movie with her name and be successful and well-liked and a well-appreciated movie. Now talking about her defining feature, I called this video Julia Roberts, the American Woman, because when I was watching her movies, and I watched a bunch of them and rewatched a bunch of them for this episode, I really wanted to do a deep dive to try to figure out, she's a Julia Roberts type, right? That's what makes her interesting. But to me, what I felt was so interesting is that all of her movies, she very rarely does a transformative role. She very rarely does something that's with an accent or something like that, unless it's a southern accent. Because for me, when I look at her, oftentimes people refer to her as America's sweetheart, and I think that's true because she's very much an American woman. Now, is she from New York or California or Georgia or Chicago or Indiana or Pennsylvania? Truthfully, I think she could be from anywhere. She's got that sort of Tom Hanks-esque every man, every woman kind of a demeanor to her. Like I said, sort of building that Julia Roberts type early on in the first chapter. She has sort of developed that persona that everyone likes, using her large facial features to be sort of a little bit weird and quirky, but genuine and authentic and always honest. So using the sort of large sparkling eyes and big mouth to always feel present, to always feel genuine, and really when you're with the scene with her, when we have a close-up, it feels like she's looking directly at you and you're there with her because of the sort of warmth that she brings to her characters in many of her movies. So in many ways, I think she is sort of the American woman, representing those American ideals of sort of pursuit of happiness and sort of the perfect element of, you'd see a lot of Americans in Hollywood movies. They're sort of totally glamorous and they have all this money and they're so joyful, but they're also sort of maybe a little bit brash and rude, but honest and a little bit messy. And they're not going to be as reserved as English people or as snobby as, say, French people. They are going to be a little bit more aggressive and leader types. And I think when I think of America, I kind of think of Julia Roberts and vice versa. And I think she is sort of a representation of all those great things of American ideals, also sort of falling into some of the stereotypes of Americans. And I really do think that that's the difference, where she could be from everywhere. She has that look and utilizes, of course, those physical features but she has, but then does so in a way that is genuine, that is charming, that always feels present and in your face. It never feels like she's acting. It always feels like this is her, and the way she so great at delivering lines of dialogue that make it feel believable and authentic. That's a very difficult thing to do, and I think that's really Julia Roberts' defining feature, her ability to represent kind of American ideals while also be really just developing a genuine and reliable and relatable character every single time because of her ability to deliver these lines of dialogue, sentimental, sappy as they may be, as genuine, authentic statements, and her ability to sort of have that rhythm of flow throughout her speech is something, in combination of course with her defining facial features, is something that is very rare within actors, and what makes Julia Roberts such a compelling movie star. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you comment below. Let me know your thoughts on maybe your favorite Julia Roberts romantic comedy, maybe an underrated supporting role. Charlie Wilson's War was a fun one that I hadn't seen before that I really enjoyed watching for this episode. So I'd love to hear that kind of stuff in the comments down below. But that's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.